to do. So there's a lot of guys. The restricted plate kind of levels the playing field, puts everybody into the race, and it's really anybody's race all the way down to the very end.
Bill France built this behemoth of a racetrack back in the late 50s. And, Jeff, as a driver, when you come here, do you feel that sense of history and the greatness that has happened at this racetrack?
No question. I always wondered what it would have been like to be one of those guys when this racetrack was built. I mean, you had to think, this man's crazy to build a track this big. And the history that's happened here, you know, and NASCAR being formed right down the road at the Streamline Hotel, all the things that have happened here, that makes this racetrack just unbelievably special. When you roll through the tunnel, I mean, there's this feeling that you get here that you don't get anywhere else because of the history and what this racetrack has meant to people that have won the Daytona 500, the Coke 0400. It's just such a special place.
Yeah, you talk about the history of this place. They used to race on the beach.
Yep.
And they built this racetrack 2.5 miles. There wasn't nothing even close to it in size when they built this racetrack. So this was like a crazy idea.
Yeah.
You know, just imagine everybody thinking that Mr. France must be the craziest man on the planet to put that kind of money and investment into something that had never been done before, nothing even close to this size. So, you know, and it's took off ever since. You know, it's lived up to that investment, and it's became the Super Bowl or sort of the backbone of our sport, the corner piece to our sport. And I love coming here only because of the history. I watched a lot of races here in the 80s as a kid down in the infield, running around and having a lot of fun. And only if I'd never had the success here, I still would love coming here only because of the history that the track has. So it's an amazing place to be at. When you drive in here, you feel it. When you drive across the racetrack on entering off turn 4, you see the size, and you're like, there's nothing like this. There's nothing to compare this to. So it's an amazing place, and when you win here, you know, especially if you win the Daytona 500, it's the greatest day a driver can have in NASCAR. Really, you know, besides winning the championship, which is a season-long effort and experience. This is a one-day. You know, it's the greatest day a driver can have winning the Daytona 500 here.
Speaking of great days, I don't know if we could have had a better opener for you to join us in the booth than a week ago at Chicagoland. I believe right there there was a slide job yelled about right then.
Oh yeah, this was so fun, and the drivers put the show on, man. I mean, that made it so much fun to call, and they gave us everything they had. Nobody left anything on the table.
And this finish was unbelievably good. You know, two guys going at it. And then when it was over, they both were like so respectful of each other and how much each brought to the table to make this happen. And I just thought that was really cool, how they respected each other. I mean, really, if you're Kyle Busch, you got run into. You know, what are you supposed to do? You run into him, and then afterwards they're all like, hey, man, it's good racing. We were treated to an unbelievable race.
Absolutely.
But I want to say this. Like, we that highlights today, but from the time they dropped the green flag until the last lap, it was an unbelievable race. From start to finish, that's what NASCAR was built on right there, and that was just unbelievably fun.
Yeah, I felt like that even if we didn't get that exciting finish, man, that was a great race. We had a battle for the lead all day. We had Eric Almirola having a career day with a real potential to win. In a track that, you know, that we didn't see that coming. I didn't see that coming. You know, he'd been consistently running inside the top 10, but he was having an amazing day. And
Clint Boyer looked strong at the beginning of that race.
How many laps down was he at one point?
Yeah, I mean, you know, 2 laps down at one point in time. Then he gets back on the lead lap toward the end of the race. One of the strongest cars on the track.
What's amazing is when you look, with as many things as happened in that race, when you look at the top 5, who was it? It was the 5 best cars all year long.
Right.
And even with all of the chaos, it still ended up being that way.
I didn't know Stewart-Haas could get any better. They answered the question last week. All 4 cars were a contender to win at some point in the race.
You used the word chaos, and we're starting to see cars rolling out onto the track right now. Junior, what do you expect to see? What do you try to learn in this first practice?
Well, it's gotten a little tougher to get a lot of experience in a pack. And what's happened over the last couple of years is the manufacturers are all getting together. And typically, if the guys aren't going out there to run single-car runs, so you see out here Kevin Harvick on a single-car run. If the guys aren't doing that, the manufacturers sort of work together and won't work with other manufacturers. So the Toyotas are all lined up and try to run together. The Fords will only try to run together. That's a decision that comes from the corporate desk in the organizations. That really isn't something the drivers show up to the track and devise this plan. This happens earlier in the week. They sit down and go, all right, all 4 teams, we're going to work together. This is what we're going to do. The Chevy teams, they're all lined up here on pit road, all Chevys, and they're all going to go out there and run together, not because they want to, because there's no other manufacturers that'll run with them. So it's really interesting how that's happened, especially with how unpredictable the drivers say these cars are, Jeff, that they're not practicing in bigger packs.
Yeah, I know that the manufacturers are trying to get all the teams to work together, but I don't know it's in the best interest of the individual teams. I think getting out there and mixing it up with everybody actually makes you smarter. But you can see, Junior mentioned it, this lane on the left that you're seeing, that's all Chevrolets. They're all lined up together. They've got a plan to go out together, and that's just what they do, Kelly.
Yeah, you know what they say about best laid plans, though, because I checked in with a few crew chiefs from each of the 3 manufacturers, and it sounded like some had loose plans to work together. For example, Rodney Childers on the 4, Kevin Harvick, obviously they're going out to make some single-car runs, which was their plan, and they hope to team up with some of their teammates, possibly with some of the Penske Fords as well, to try to get a little pack run going. I checked in with Alan Gustafson. Of course, that would be one of those Chevy drivers with Chase Elliott. And he said he wants to do some pack racing, but he just wasn't really sure. He said they were going to kind of figure it out as this practice unfolded, if all the Chevys could get together. He kind of laughed and said, one thing I've learned in racing is that people don't really want to help out their fellow competitors much when we get here. So, and then finally on the Toyota side of things, I checked in with Adam Stevens on the 18 of Kyle Busch, and he's not really interested in doing much pack racing, potentially with a couple of his teammates, but he's really just going out there to shake down that 18.
Well, that's an interesting strategy, Kelly, just because we've heard so much about the handling of these cars, that they don't handle well. And, I just think that's interesting. I think you've got to go out in a pack. And, one thing we've seen is I do think Chevrolet has been behind in regard to the teammates all working together. It seems like to me the Toyota camp and the Ford camp, they have come and said, okay, we're going to try to work together in the race. And I think the Chevy camp has been a little behind in that. And maybe this is the beginning of trying something different for the race and saying, okay, in practice we're going to work together, and guess what, we're going to continue this in the race. I haven't been told that, but there's some kind of a signal right here being sent.
Yeah, they have to work together because there's no one else to draft with. The Fords aren't going to draft with them or work with them. We're going down in a 43 car here at the helmet cam on Bubba Wallace this weekend, so let's get in there and take a ride. See, this track's getting rougher. Jeff, I've been talking or heard from some of the drivers that new bumps getting bigger. This place is really smooth when they repaved it. Didn't have to worry about ride quality and the balance of the car and how the car might be affected by bumps like we had to last week at Chicago. Well, as you see by the helmet cam and the movement, it actually is getting a little bit rougher. Starting to have to worry about getting your car across them bumps, and if you're tight and you hit a bump, you get tighter. Or if you're loose and you hit a bump, you might get looser. So those are some of the things guys are having to start to deal with on this racetrack as it starts to age and get some character.
A lot of respect gained by Darrell Wallace Jr. Bubba as he finished second in the Daytona 500 earlier this year. He came back and said, you know what? The way you have a good finish at Daytona is you run up front. Stay out of those big messes that could possibly happen. So he wants to be up front as much as possible, and I think he proved that he can run up front.
We saw a little bit earlier, Bubba Wallace came on the racetrack. Look at the smoke coming out of the left rear. Sure, that's just a left rear tire rubbing. They try to get these cars that traveled when leave pit road anymore. They're traveled already, but the rear end moves around the car just a little bit and drags the left rear quarter panel. So that's something the team will have to look at. It looks like it's clearanced itself, and a lot of times that's what you're hoping for, is that it's going to rub a little bit, then it'll push itself out after it's rubbed for just a few corners.
Bubba earlier in February, he ran up in the top 5 most of the race. He was very competitive. It looked as though he was figuring out the draft and how to work the draft. But look how close it was between he and Denny Hamlin. And probably one of the most emotional times I've ever seen Darrell Wallace Jr. Bubba was after that race right here when his family came into the media center. He said, I wanted to make you proud. He definitely made the family proud, that's for sure. And he made Richard Petty Motorsports proud. They were very excited about the finish that they saw out of the young driver in the 43.
Imagine had he won the race, Jeff.
Yeah.
That was for a second-place finish. And Bubba's an emotional guy, or Bubba wears his feelings on his sleeve. You know exactly where he sits and stands with pretty much everything. He's not a guy who tries to hide that or cover that up, and he let us all see it there after the Daytona 500 this year. And I think that had everybody hoping for good things for Bubba going forward, to see more of that emotion, knowing how much that meant to him. It'd be incredible to see him in victory lane, what kind of emotion we'd see.
Chevrolets have been working together, and that is why they hold the top 10 spots now as far as fastest speeds, nearing 200 miles an hour here at Daytona. I'm going to admit, last week, fantasy did not go well for me. I think in our league, I'm 830 something. I know, Junior, you're up closer to the top. Things are going a little bit better. Burton, you're right there as well.
I picked off right.
You're behind him, though.
I
did notice that.
This new league, right where I left off in the old one, around inside 200. That's pretty good.
Yeah, you guys did pretty well. You can join in if you want. Pick 5 drivers, compete against friends or us if you want. Go to NASCAR.com/fantasy to get started.
And I can assure all you guys that play this game, there's no way Rick can get that lucky again.
It didn't take long, did it? Jimmy Johnson was leading the Chevrolet pack as they came off of pit road. Now they're shuffling around a little bit, and that pack has dissipated into now just 3 cars working together here. But this really has to be a big weekend for Hendrick and Chevrolet as a whole organization.
Yeah, the organization's been pretty strong here over the last several years, but Jimmy has kind of struggled. It's been, ever since he won a couple Daytona 500s here, he's been a little bit snake bit. And, we haven't seen him have that continued performance, but the speed's there in the cars. The 88 car's been on the pole here last couple races. The 24 car with Chase Elliott, when he was in the 24 car, was on the pole several races here. So they had the speed. I thought they looked good and were racy at the 500. Chase had a pretty good weekend. The cars looked like they handled well, and they were handling the new rule changes very well. But again, Jimmy has not had the opportunity to really finish these races.
Right.
To be able to show what he's capable of doing. So I'm sure he'd love to turn that around.
We talked to him just before this practice started, and I said, Jimmy, are you happy that your strategy of practice has changed? Because for years, Chad Knaus wouldn't let that car on the racetrack if there was another car out there. He said, you're running all by yourself, that's it. Now we're seeing him go out there in packs, and Jimmy said, yes, I'm glad he changed that strategy. I'm glad I'm out there running.
Well, that's because he wrecked in many races. Like thing would just spin out on him. He'd come off the corner and he'd be pointed in the wrong direction. So, that team has really struggled with handling of their race cars. And, as we're looking at Jimmy go down pit road, working on pit road speed, something has changed this week for this race is the spoiler on the back of these cars is just a little bit bigger. They've added 5 inches of width to it, Junior, for a couple reasons. Number one, they thought they were going just a tick too fast, needed to get some speed out of it. But in addition to that, these cars, since they put them on the ground with no ride height rule, they have been a handful to drive. So just a little more downforce on the car, put a little bit of speed out of Austin Dillon trying to get on pit road. He didn't make it. He's trying a little too hard. It's okay, though.
The patriotic paint scheme of Austin Dillon, and what a roller coaster ride, especially of emotions that he has to feel when he comes to Daytona. Remember back in 2015 at the end of the race, which happened at about 2 or 3 in the morning because of rain delays. Junior, you end up winning that race, but I remember one of the questions you asked, because you looked in your mirror and you said, oh my gosh, what just happened, was, is Austin Dillon okay? And amazingly,
look how quickly that car came to a stop.
And then got hit.
And had to get hit again, which none of us ever saw that. But when I was looking in the mirror, I saw the bottom of that race car, and then I saw the car make contact with a fence. And I was just, it's just your concern goes right to your fellow competitor at that point, because that's a dangerous situation for him as well as the fans. And luckily, here's his win for Daytona.
Yeah, things can change. You can go from that where you stop immediately in the catch fence to you maybe move a guy out of the way and you win the biggest race in NASCAR.
Yeah, that's Daytona right there. I mean, you have to block, right? If Eric Almirola, he doesn't block, he don't win the Daytona 500, but when he started to block, Austin Dillon's like, well, if I lift, I'm not going to win the Daytona 500. So, you know, that's really the give and take of Daytona right there in a nutshell. Is you 1 minute you're in the fence, wrecked big time. The next time you win the race, and in both cases there was contact. There was an incident in both cases, and that's what makes Daytona so hard. If you look at the number of cautions at this racetrack, the number of times you're in a wreck, it's very high, and it's cars don't handle well. You can't lift when you want to lift. You just can't, because if you do, you're not going to win. You have to be super aggressive, and when you do those things, we get these wrecks.
Speaking of being aggressive, we're going to take a look at the 3-car coming down trying to get on the pit road. They're going to come in hot. What they like to do is come in real hard and try to clearance the splitter, get the splitter dragged off a little bit. You can see that you obviously can't get the car slowed down. There's a couple factors that can play into that, and obviously it's the car is sitting on the splitter too hard. Right here he's hammering down on the brakes, and he's sitting on the splitter, and the tires can't stop the car because it's basically like a snowplow. And so I think the next time he comes through there, he could probably attempt that same aggressiveness and be able to stop, because he's clearanced that splitter, drug quite a bit off the splitter under braking there. But or they could actually raise the car up. They could make some adjustments to help him, be able to use the tires, use the brakes to stop the car. Because if it's sliding across the racetrack on that splitter, it's not going to stop.
And it's so important because we've seen a great deal of these races, AAA races, we've seen green flag pit stops.
Yeah.
You have to expect it. And with stage racing, we've seen early pit stops well before the end of the stage. And if you do that and you make a mistake and you lose the draft, that could be the end of your night. And if there's 10 cars pitting and you're the guy that's 10th in line and you don't get on pit road well, and then you have a little bit of a slow pit stop, the next thing you know, you've lost the draft.
Yeah.
And you come around and get lapped, and that could be the end of your night. So
you got to be as aggressive as you can getting on the pit road. Another thing, too, is a lot of times you're not going to be changing 4 tires. Guys, pit crew's going to want you to come down pit road as hard as you can without sliding those tires. Right. You can't be conservative. It's too competitive in this sport.
I talked about roller coaster of emotions. How about when you're 7 years old and you're in victory lane with the Intimidator when he won the 500, and then you're back in victory lane holding up 3 fingers as you're the champion.
That's true.
NBC Sports Championship season continues. Can Jordan Spieth get back on track and vie for the coveted Claret Jug again this year? Don't miss the Open. That's July 19th through the 22nd on the Golf Channel and NBC. And can Tiger Woods contend for a major again? That'll be something we'll keep our eye on. And we were talking about the 24 and the speed that it has had in qualifying here at Daytona. Now William Byron behind the wheel. Let's listen into the radio, the 24.
I can see most everything with the car in front of me. Like if there's a slight stack up, then that's probably the only thing I really need to know. But that gap behind me, like if it's closing or if it's separating a little bit, half a car length to a car length increments, and that also really determines if you're able to make a move or not. If somebody's closing in quickly, is more of a boost than just hanging out, you know? Yeah, it's more, I agree. More concerned about 2 cars behind me, or 1 car.
He's getting a lot of information there about, what he needs from his spotter. And so he kind of needs to know not only what the car behind him is doing, but the cars behind that car. And what kind of energy are they creating? Are they going to have enough run that they're going to actually pull out and try to pass him, or will they be willing to help him? And typically, if a guy behind you has a really good pusher, he's probably going to take that run. He's probably going to pull out with that opportunity. But if he has a run on you, but nobody behind him really tight to help, you need that information, because that means that guy's probably not going to pull out, because he knows it'll be for no good reason. I mean, if you don't have any drafting help or anybody behind you to help you make the pass, you're not going to make that move. So it's just really good information to get from your spotter, and you can hear William starting to learn what he needs. I mean, he's a young driver with not a lot of experience at the plate tracks, and as he's learning what these cars are capable of doing, he wants to know what he's trying to tell them what he needs to hear about his competition, and that's pretty clever on his part as he's starting to learn how this all works.
And his spotter tabloid's been around for a while. They just need to be communicating with each other so they know exactly what to expect. And this is only their 3rd plate race together, so they're still learning together. We talked about the spoiler early in practice where you can see what they did was they added 2.5 inches to each side of the spoiler right in this area. They made it wider. And also you can see there's those dots right there. Those are bolts. And there's actually holes in the spoiler where they actually can add more spoiler to it. If NASCAR decides these cars are still going too fast, or they don't handle like the drivers want them to, they can bolt wings on that spoiler and actually add to the spoiler. So that's something that they're, came down here with an open mind. NASCAR did, to say if this isn't enough, we can add to the spoiler, and that's already built in. You can see it's got bolts in it now, just so no air can go through the spoiler. Those bolts will be required if they don't end up adding the wing. But that's just something that NASCAR is doing to try to make the race better and to get a little speed down from a safety standpoint.
There's 22 car Joe Logano. They're a team, Penske, the whole organization, been super successful over the last several years at the plate tracks. And he's got a great spotter, T.J. Majors.
I was just getting ready to say, did you teach T.J. Majors how to
take all that credit?
Is he a great spotter because of the way that you taught him to be a great spotter? Because he went on to win with Joey Logano at a plate track.
He sure did. We're going to take a look at that way in Talladega. TJ was a great spotter when we started working together, and that's why I wanted to work with him, because he was a driver. He had been a driver in his past, and most drivers that decide to be spotters, they know what a driver wants to hear. So they're kind of pre-programmed when they get up on that spotter stand to give you that great information. And I felt like when these two teamed up, knowing how good TJ is on top of the spotter stand, that was only going to make Joey stronger at the plate tracks.
After that race on the radio, I remember Joey Logano thanking T.J. Majors, saying, "Hey, buddy, you definitely helped us get this win." And I thought that really is telling you how important T.J. Majors has been to not only Joey's success, but the success that you had.
Yeah, I wish I could explain how important the spotter is at Daytona and Talladega, referencing some of the stuff we were talking about with William Byron there. A good spotter can really tell you what, the 5 or 10 cars behind you are doing. And that information helps you understand which lane to be in, which lane to get in front of, and how big a run these guys are coming and how it's generating. And TJ would give you this information before it was happening. He could see that a line was forming and that energy was starting to happen that would create a run for that particular line. And you got to get that information early so you can make these moves that you need to make to put yourself in position to take advantage of that and make passes or maintain the lead.
And something that makes TJ Majors better? Little Doug Yates horsepower under the hood doesn't hurt either.
Oh, yeah. He was thanking Doug as well at the end of that race at Talladega. Can he keep going and win at the next restrictor plate track, which is right here in Daytona? Make sure to get the NBC Sports app. Catch all the action of NASCAR on NBC. Know that there are right now 3 drivers over 200 miles an hour here at Daytona. Get that information anytime, anywhere with the NBC Sports app. Let's go down to the garage and Kelly.
And Rick, you can see the 18 there of Kyle Busch waiting to go out and make another run. You guys have been talking a lot about this new spoiler that's wider on these cars here. I talked to crew chief Adam Stevens about that. He didn't seem too pleased with it. The reason being they feel like they've been a little bit behind the 8 ball with their restrictor plate program. He said we closed the gap a little bit at Talladega, but the one area they feel like they had made some ground was in the handling of the race cars. And now with these wider spoilers, he feels like that's kind of taken some of that edge away. He said, look, the worse handling they can make these cars, the better it is for us. So he said, hey, we feel like we've raised the bar a little bit with this car we're bringing here to Daytona, but then again, so is probably everyone else.
And that's confidence in the driver and confidence in himself. That my driver can drive a car when it's not perfect, and by the way, I can make his car drive pretty well also. And that's what the best believe, right? Give me something that's difficult, and I'll make more out of it than the next guy.
Yeah, there's been, all the drivers want to make the cars as hard to drive as possible. So on all the 1.5 miles and every other racetrack besides the plate tracks, they've been trimming the downforce out of the cars because the drivers have felt like that would put on a better race. And they also feel like that makes it harder, and therefore that makes them better and gives them individually a better opportunity to win the race. But here at Daytona and at Talladega, the drivers been complaining about how uncomfortable the cars are and almost maybe looking at NASCAR to help them bring some stability back into these cars. But as much as we hear about how uncomfortable they are, we don't see too many people out here putting themselves in enough race-type scenarios in the draft to learn about their car and improve it. It seems almost that speed is so important, and being trimmed out is so important that it even trumps, balance and comfort.
And even, Junior, we got two different packs. The pack on the right side, and the pack on the left side, they're too wide. But still, there's only 6 cars.
Yeah.
It's not like you have 40 cars out there. And the pack on the right, they're single file. Most Toyotas, see Austin Dillon in that 3 car, he's got himself in the middle of all those Toyotas. But
they're all single file.
They're all single file. They're not really learning anything except for maybe how far the cars are going to travel, if they're going to hit something. The only way you can learn is to have 20 cars and go out there and try to race, to go out there and practice like we've seen here in the past. The negative of that is when we've seen them do it, they wreck. When they wreck, then the crew chief's like, well, man, you wrecked my car. Now I'm messed up. So that's the give and take. I think they should be out there at multi-cars and practicing and figuring out what their car can't do, and then the crew chief gets mad at me because I wrecked it. And it's just, I don't think there's an answer to that.
One thing different between the Xfinity Series and the Cup Series is that in the Cup Series, they can lock bumpers. They can try to do the pushing of one another and work their way as 2 cars up to the front. You can't do that in the Xfinity Series. You can bump, but you can't lock bumpers. So is there a strategy and a talent to that, hitting the car at the right pace or hitting it at the right area?
Well, I think the hard thing to do, the thing about the Cup cars is they don't really line up all that well. Everybody's car seems to work with different manufacturers. Like the noses are so unique to each car that you might not be able to push a Toyota, but you can push a Ford, or you might not be able to push a Ford, but you can push a Chevy. So and it depends on where these guys have their rear height set. That can also affect how easy it is to push a certain car. It just really has to be a situation where they line up just right. And it's still then, with how much, how unstable the cars are or have been this year, it's still a questionable decision on how hard you push a guy. And so you don't see it a lot in the Cup. And I think that's why there's no rule, because they don't really have that ability that they have in the Xfinity Series to lock bumpers. So there's no rule necessary.
And NASCAR worked really hard on rules to make it where you couldn't push. They just work exceptionally hard. And everything you just mentioned, in addition, it's just not as effective as it used to be.
Couple groups working together. How much are they learning? Are they seeing the air out there on the racetrack? See a couple drivers over 200 mile per hour average here. Earlier today, Todd Lewis of the Golf Channel was out here talking golf with Denny Hamlin, but the conversation went to seeing the air at a racetrack like this. Listen in.
I hear at Daytona International Speedway, Dale Earnhardt used to say that he could see the air. Do you vision that as well?
What he's basically saying is he can see pockets of air starting to form. So you can see 2 cars up in front of you. If they're disturbing the air, you can feel it in your car. Your car will start to pick up RPM because there's less resistance on it. If you get 2 cars side by side, just think about if you follow one tractor trailer, that's a good amount of air on the highway that your car starts buffering around. If you put 2 beside each other, there's almost no air coming to your car, so there's nothing going to your back spoiler. And that's the only thing that slows us down is air touching the back spoiler. That slows our car. Well, if there's no air in front of us hitting that spoiler, these things go really, really fast.
Gotcha.
Yeah, Denny's right. When back in the day when they could lay the spoilers down, they laid them down flat and almost unrealistically as far as how the cars drove and how the balance was when they laid them spoilers down. But that's what they had to do to go fast. NASCAR had to mandate spoiler angle. But Denny's talking about Dad being able to see the air. And what I took away from that when I would hear that is that Dad knew how the air went around the cars. And in my mind, it works like a boat wake. And so the air comes off the nose of the car and sort of creates a V, and the air shoots off the side of the car away from the car. It doesn't stay tight down the door. And that's why we can side draft. That's why we get up on the guy's quarter panels, because you're almost still in a draft as you would be behind the car if you're tight on his quarter panel. And so that was what I thought Dad meant when he said, man, I could see the air. He just knew where that air was going to be its most dense and where it would be the least resistance. Whether it was one car he was following or 2 or 3, 4 or 5 cars and cars side by side. He just knew where to go to find the least resistance from that air and the least amount of drag on his car.
And as you were saying that, we're riding along with Ricky Stenhouse Jr., and you could hear the RPMs go up as he got in behind. See, right now they go down. He doesn't have a car in front of him, but when he got behind 2 cars, the RPMs go up. You hear it at a higher frequency.
Well, now the 43 car is catching the group in front of him. Okay, and so that means the 17 is going to be catching them as well. So you hear the corner, you hear the engine bog down. Okay, watch the RPMs, 82. Now he's on the straight, and he's getting a draft. So now the RPMs are starting to go back up. So the resistance that the corner creates pulls those RPMs down. And then when on the straight, you don't have that resistance, and the RPMs start building back up.
Ricky Stenhouse Jr. has definitely separated himself from quite a few drivers as being one of the better plate race drivers.
Yeah, these races are, really what put Roush Fenway on the map last year. It's what propelled them into the playoffs. I think that put a lot of pressure on them for this year. I think this is how they're going to have to work themselves in the playoffs, most likely. And Ricky Stenhouse Jr. proved that he knew how to do it. Jimmy Finning, a longtime crew chief in the Cup Garage, he heads up this plate program for Roush Fenway, and they brought fast race cars. We talked about Doug Yates and the Power. That's the engines they got in these cars, but they also, with Jimmy Finnan's leadership, have done a great job of bringing speed to the racetrack.
I think you got to give Brian Patty, his crew chief, some credit as well. They qualify well. That, to me, is not only a great sign of a good speedway program, but a sharp crew chief. Got to really get some speed and trim the car out. Ricky's aggressive enough to show out on these plate races, because it takes a guy that's aggressive, that's willing to put his car in some very questionable situations and throw difficult blocks that a lot of guys have a hard time pulling off. I think that's why Joe Logano runs so well, because he's aggressive, whether he's being on the offense or the defense. And I see the same thing in Stenhouse, and he was able to back up what a lot of people thought was a fluke by going to Talladega and winning there.
I think that's kind of a backdoor compliment to Steve Letarte. You're saying that the crew chiefs have something to do with being able to win. So when you were able to win, then it was because of Steve, maybe. Is that right?
Got to give him some credit, for sure.
I wouldn't go that far.
All right. Verizon IndyCar Series will be short track. Iowa Speedway. That's on NBCSN. The Iowa Corn 300, Sunday, 2:30 p.m. Eastern. Again on NBCSN, a little short track racing for those guys.
Now, you talk about a rough racetrack. That Iowa racetrack is rough. And you hear about Indy cars all the time. They got to have a smooth racetrack. Well, they are going to one that is anything but smooth.
Let's go to Kelly.
You're looking at a car there of Kevin Harvick's. It's a brand new race car. Rodney Childers told me that should have a little bit more downforce than before. When I asked him what this race this weekend was about for them, he said survival. He said, we've had a hard time finishing these restrictor plate races as of late, although they felt like they maybe turned a corner at Talladega by finishing it. They have been fast, though, and racked up a lot of stage points. But he said, look, we know there's going to be a lot of drivers who see this as their best opportunity to win one and get into the playoffs. And he said, guys were driving like their hair was on fire at lap 12 of the Daytona 500. He expects more of the same this weekend, and they just don't want to get caught up in any of that trouble.
So much has been said about the big three, Kevin Harvick, of course, being one of those. The reason they are the big three, well, they have the most wins, 5 each for Harvick and Busch, 3 for Truex Jr. The most top fives, they're 1, 2, 3 in that category as well. Look at most laps led this season, first, second, and fourth. Ryan Blaney slides in there at third. Most playoff points, of course, first, second, and third again for the big three. But when you talk about places where the big three haven't had the great success, both Daytona and Talladega pop up on that screen as far as places where they haven't been dominant.
And of those three, the last win here was in 2010. So it's been a long time since one of those three has won a race here. And this is a chance, man. This is a chance to knock them out of the way and take that spot off.
Martin Truex Jr. has never won a plate race.
There you go.
Isn't that blowing your mind? Yeah. I mean, when I hear that, I just can't believe it. Because he's been racing for so long and had so much good success in the Xfinity Series with Chance 2. And, I mean, he's been up front, finished second in the Daytona 500.
Close, but it hasn't happened as we see the 18 coming onto pit road.
So this race last year, you just heard that report about Kevin Harvick and his team. Well, this is the end of the race in July of last year. Well, look at the teams and the drivers that are contending for this win. I mean, you don't see the big names. You
Ricky
don't
Stenhouse
see
Jr., Ty Dillon.
Yeah, in this picture, we don't have them, man, and that's what this race can be. You go into the race thinking all the big names, but you get 2 or 3 big wrecks, and next thing you know, there's teams that have and drivers that have an opportunity to save a year, to make a career in one race, and that's not unusual to see at this racetrack.
Yeah, it's been amazing at this racetrack how there have been different winners over the last 8 races. It was way back in 2014 that Eric Almirola, that rain-shortened race, was able to get the win. All the way up to Austin Dillon winning in February. NASCAR America comes to you every weekday, 5 o'clock, and a little special show today will be from right here at Daytona International Speedway. And then tomorrow, it's going to be Fan Friday from right here in the Fan Zone. Rutledge Wood, Rutledge and you, Dale Jr., will be hanging out at the Fan Zone, and you've got some special guests that will join you. Austin Dillon, Ricky Stenhouse Jr., Bubba Wallace Jr., Denny Hamlin, all will be a part of Fan Friday, Fun Friday. It should be.
Yeah, it's always fun hanging out with Rut. It's going to be great for the fans here and also everybody watching at home. Be a live show. Get out there and see if we can't get those drivers to give us some of the secrets to getting around this place, man. We'll talk to them, see if they know some of the secrets.
They might tell you something now. They wouldn't tell you last year.
They probably are going to be asking you the questions.
No, man, now that I'm on the other side, I'm going to see, it'll be interesting how the drivers react with me interviewing them. That's going to be completely awkward.
You're going to really
tune in, check it
well,
out.
I'm glad we'll have a camera there for you.
You know what you're getting ready to learn is how much they were lying to you last year.
We'll see. We'll see if they're nice.
Well, the last few seconds of this practice, we're seeing a little more action on the racetrack. Guys moving around, finding different tracks around the track.
We're seeing other manufacturers mixing in too. So that tells me that these guys are wanting to check that box. How does my car feel? I don't care whether I'm racing Fords or whether I'm crossing company lines or whatever. These are drivers that are like, hey, I need to get out there. Let me get out there and get around some guys so I can make sure that we don't have any concerns. Some guys aren't doing that. Some teams are just making single car runs, feeling confident that they're not going to have any issues. These guys, they definitely want to get out there and check it out. Also, you got guys like Bubba Wallace with a limited amount of experience. He's just out there learning, what works.
It's just so interesting to me because you said earlier that all the drivers talk about how bad they drive, that these cars all drive bad. And once you get to the racetrack, the only way to make it better is to work on the car, to make changes to the car to make it drive better. This is not a place like Michigan where you can lift.
Yeah.
If you get yourself in a situation where you're having to lift all the time and you can't be aggressive, when a hole presents itself, Rick, you got to drive in it. You can't hesitate and say, oh, I can't go there because my car doesn't handle well. You got to drive it in there, and if you can't do that, you don't stand a very good chance of winning this race.
Yeah. If you can't aggressively make moves, if you can't turn the steering wheel, if you need to turn hard left and get in and change lines, and even in the middle of the corner, you got to be able to do those things with confidence. If you're nervous about the back of your car and the level of grip you have, You're going to make less moves. You're going to be less offensive, more defensive. It's just going to be a day where it's going to be full of frustration because you're going to see opportunity but not be able to capitalize on it.
So we're going to look at some speed, some times, and how much weight do you put to these? Because these were all in packs. Guys like Clint Boyer, Eric Almirola, Brad Keselowski, guys that were over 200 miles an hour, they were in a certain spot in the track. That's why their average is so high.
Yeah, if I'm looking at the times, it doesn't really matter to me. This information is great, but I'm really watching the cars out on the track. What cars are getting runs? What cars aren't getting runs? What cars are great at pushing? What cars, when a car does get a run, how long does it sustain that run? Does it sustain that run for a lap and a half, 2 laps? Some cars, they'll get great runs and lose them before they get to the next corner. So you'll know those guys will be able to accomplish more on Sunday.
All right, I struggled in fantasy last week, so tell me which cars looked good in practice out here.
So there's the 88 looked great.
Yeah.
I mean, I was watching. That car's been fast the last several times we've been to Daytona with Alex driving it and with me driving it. It had a lot of speed. We saw in the February race, Alex ran really well for the limited amount of experience he had. When you don't have experience, you usually don't have a lot of help. But he did pretty good with the speed he had in the car, and it looks great again today, but it really comes down to whether the other drivers trust Alex when they're helping him that he'll make the right moves.
Maybe they trust that number.
Yeah, maybe so. It's leaning a little different way this year, but it's still got great speed. That may be across the company at HMS, so we'll have to see. We'll get a little more practice here later today.
I think it's so hard to tell. When you're driving a race car, even when you're not 3 wide, you get a very good sense of who has speed and who can run up to you and who can't. Standing up here, it's really hard to tell. I want to see them when they're 2 wide and it counts. I want to see them on old tires, who can really drive and who can be aggressive. And I don't know that yet because I haven't seen that yet.
Right.
So I've watched so much of these practices, and I think that guy looks really good. And I go watch them race, and they can't stay in the gas, and they can't do what they need to do. So speed will fool you here on this weekend, especially when it's hot. Tires are going to get old. So I'm going to wait and see who looks good on Saturday night.
In the first practice, 6 cars all averaged over 200 miles an hour here at Daytona International Speedway. Final practice for NASCAR Xfinity Series. That is coming up on the other side of the break.